It started with a bark, not the playful kind you'd expect from a retired canine dog visiting a nursing home. Not even the alert bark used in training exercises. This bark was deep, sudden, unshakably focused. It came from a place of instinct, honed over years of detecting what most humans couldn't see, smell, or even imagine. Rocky, a grizzled old German shepherd with a black canine vest faded from too many days in the sun, stood frozen at the foot of room 103. His ears pricked forward, his tail stiff, and his eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes, locked on a single object, an old flattened pillow at the head of the bed. It didn't make sense. No one else noticed the pillow. It looked just like the hundreds of others scattered across the rooms of Ridge Valley Retirement Home, but Rocky wouldn't stop barking. He moved closer. He growled. He pawed once, lightly, almost respectfully, then sat, tail thumping once, waiting. Officer Jamie Callahan stood in the doorway, hands on her hips, trying to process what she was seeing. She'd only brought Rocky here as part of a community outreach effort. She never imagined he'd go right back into work mode the minute he walked through the door, and especially not over a pillow. Rocky wasn't just any dog. He had served with the Cleveland PD for nearly 8 years. Explosives, search and rescue, narcotics, you name it. He'd earned his badge and then some. Now officially retired, he was adjusting to a quieter life. That's what this visit was, supposed to be. Easy, therapeutic. A way to help elderly residents smile. Instead, the air in room 103 turned cold. The room belonged to Ms. Eleanor Greaves, 87 years old, sharp-minded, mostly quiet, a widow for over 5 decades. She didn't talk much to the staff, but she kept to a routine, always dressed before breakfast, always kept her room tidy. The pillow in question had been with her since she arrived 3 years ago. Jamie walked in slowly, crouched beside Rocky, and laid a hand gently on his fur. "What is it, boy?" she asked, more out of habit than expectation. Rocky didn't look at her. He simply stared at the pillow, ears rigid. The next morning, Rocky did the same thing. They walked by several rooms, but when they passed Eleanor's door, he pulled at the leash, sat, barked again. Ms. Greaves, seated by the window with her teacup, said nothing. She didn't even flinch. At lunch, Jamie sat with a couple of nurses in the break room. She couldn't get the scene out of her head. She decided to ask casually. "Hey," she started, "what's Ms. Greaves's story?" Nurse Carol looked up from her yogurt. "Eleanor? Quiet type. Never had kids. Lost her husband way back. Some kind of accident at a factory, I think. She was a nurse for years." "Does she ever have visitors?" The table went silent. "No," another nurse said finally. "Never." Jamie nodded slowly, thoughts churning. Why was Rocky reacting so strongly to her pillow of all things? If you're enjoying this mysterious journey and want more stories where brave animals uncover hidden truths, make sure to subscribe to our channel, Heroes for Animals, where real courage comes with 4 legs and a wagging tail. That evening, after Eleanor went to the common room for bingo night, Jamie returned to room 103. She didn't have clearance, but something told her Rocky's instincts were worth trusting. She opened the door and let him lead. He walked straight to the bed and sat beside the pillow again, this time whimpering softly. Jamie approached. The pillow was heavier than she expected. Lumpy, not filled with down or foam, something more compact. She gently turned it over. The stitching along one side was uneven, a little newer than the rest. She ran her finger along the seam, then froze. There was a tiny slit, almost invisible. Her heart picked up speed. "Okay, Rocky," she whispered. "Let's see what you found." With a careful tug, she pulled the seam apart just enough to reveal an old envelope. Yellowed, brittle, tucked so deep that no one would have found it by accident. Written in looping Careful cursive were the words. For Kenneth. If anyone ever finds this. Jamie's breath caught in her throat. She turned the envelope over. It had never been opened, never mailed, never even sealed. She slipped it into her jacket and left before anyone could see her. Back in her car, parked on the edge of the lot, Jamie opened the envelope with trembling hands. The letter inside was long, 2 pages, front and back. But it wasn't just a letter. It was a suicide note, a confession, a love story, a cry for help that was never heard. The first words read, "My darling Kenneth, if you are reading this, then I am already gone. Or I meant to be. I never had the courage to finish what I started, but I wrote this all the same." Jamie sat in stunned silence as she read Eleanor's handwriting. The letter told the story of a grave mistake Eleanor had made as a young nurse. A hospital mix-up, a child who didn't make it. She was never formally blamed, but the guilt had followed her for 60 years. She lost her job, then her will to live. This letter had been her goodbye, but she never went through with it. Instead, she carried it, literally, inside her pillow, for decades. And somehow Rocky had known. Jamie leaned back in her seat, the letter trembling in her hands. Rocky lay curled up in the back seat, eyes closed now. His job was done for the moment. But Jamie knew something had to be done next. She couldn't ignore this, not after what Rocky found, not when a woman had carried this pain in silence for longer than most people were alive. And most of all, not when a dog's bark had spoken louder than any words ever could. Jamie didn't sleep that night. She left the envelope on her nightstand and stared at it for hours. It felt like she was holding someone's soul, someone who had given up on being heard a long time ago. What do you do with that? Who do you tell? Do you even have the right? She kept asking herself one question over and over. Why now? Why had Rocky barked at that pillow after all these years? The next morning, she skipped her usual coffee stop. She drove straight to the precinct. Not because she was filing a case, there wasn't one yet, but because she needed perspective. Detective Marshall, her former partner, was already at his desk. She pulled the letter from her jacket and placed it face down. "Read it," she said. Raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. That was part of what made him a good cop. 10 minutes later, he let out a long sigh. "Damn." "I know," Jamie said softly. She never sent this. It was sewn inside her pillow. Marshall leaned back, folding his arms. "You want to know what I'd do?" Jamie nodded. "Tell her you found it and then listen." Back at Ridge Valley, Rocky was already a minor celebrity. Residents waved to him in the halls. Staff gave him bits of turkey from lunch trays. He trotted beside Jamie like he owned the place. But when they neared room 103, he slowed. Ms. Eleanor Greaves was seated by her window again, the morning sun painting her profile in light. Her hands rested gently on her lap. As they approached, her gaze shifted to Rocky, and for the first time, she spoke before anyone else did. "He found it, didn't he?" Jamie felt her heart stop for a beat. "You knew he would," Eleanor continued. "I saw it in his eyes, just like I saw it in my husband's, the night he left for work and never came back." Jamie took a seat across from her. "I didn't mean to violate your privacy." Eleanor looked out the window. "I wrote that letter the night I almost ended everything. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because I didn't deserve peace." Jamie unfolded the letter between them. "It's not just about what you did," she said carefully. "It's about what you've carried." Eleanor's eyes welled. "I didn't kill that child. Not directly. But I mixed up 2 charts. A boy was given penicillin. He was allergic. I found out too late. His name was Caleb. He was 6. She wiped her cheek with a trembling hand. "I confessed to my supervisor. He told me to keep quiet. Said it wouldn't bring Caleb back, that I'd lose everything. And I did. Except my life. That I couldn't give up. Jamie let the silence stretch. Eleanor, she finally said, what if Rocky found it because it's finally time to let it go? Eleanor blinked. Let it go? Jamie nodded. Not erase it, not forget, just let someone else carry the weight with you. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small book. There's a counselor who works with veterans and first responders. She's worked with people who've seen and done things they never thought they'd survive. You could talk to her. Or not. But I think Caleb deserves to be remembered, and you deserve to stop punishing yourself. Eleanor looked at the letter again, her fingers brushing its edge. I don't know how to forgive myself. Jamie offered a soft smile. Then, let someone else start. Later that week, Jamie arranged a quiet meeting with Director Harold and Ridge Valley's legal advisor. She showed them the letter with Eleanor's permission. There was no legal liability. The event was decades past, never formally documented. But it was a piece of human history. They didn't talk about disciplinary action. They talked about healing. Eleanor was offered a choice. Let the letter stay a private memory, or allow it to become part of something greater. A month later, Ridge Valley held an open mic storytelling night, part of their new mental wellness initiative. Eleanor sat quietly in the back, but when her name was called, she rose slowly, letter in hand. Rocky was curled up at Jamie's feet nearby. The room fell still. She began to speak, not of guilt, but of love. Of her husband, of Caleb, of mistakes, and mercy. She didn't read the letter word for word, just enough to let the weight lift. Tears flowed, some from staff who'd cared for her for years, never knowing the pain she carried. Some from residents who began to whisper about their own hidden truths. That night, Eleanor smiled a real smile. Rocky became the official therapy dog at Ridge Valley. His visits weren't just welcome, they were healing. Jamie took him every Saturday. The residents started calling him the confessor. He had that look, they said, like he could see right through you but wouldn't judge. Eleanor passed away quietly 6 months later, in her sleep. Her room was clean, her bed was made, and on her nightstand sat 2 items, a photo of a 6-year-old boy with bright eyes, and a note that read, "He forgave me, and I forgive myself. Thank you, Rocky." The story of Eleanor and the pillow became a quiet legend at Ridge Valley, but only a few people knew the truth. That it took a dog's bark to break open a silence 60 years old. That even after a lifetime of guilt, redemption is possible. And that sometimes the most important letters are the ones never sent but finally read. There's something strange that happens when you start listening to silence. It speaks. After Eleanor Greaves passed, things at Ridge Valley felt different. Not sad, peaceful. The staff noticed it. The residents noticed it. And Rocky? Rocky noticed it most of all. For 2 weekends, Jamie brought him back like usual. He greeted people, accepted treats, napped in sunbeams. But he didn't bark. Not like he had before. Until one rainy Sunday afternoon, Jamie had just signed in at the front desk when Rocky froze in the lobby. His ears perked up, his nose lifted slightly, and then he bolted. Not toward the resident halls, but toward the rear staircase, the one that led up to the old attic. "Rocky," Jamie called, breaking into a jog. "Hey, what's going on, buddy?" He stopped at the stairwell door, whining. No one used the attic anymore. It was a dusty storage area, full of boxes, old furniture, things no one had touched in years. The door was usually locked, but today, it was open. Jamie hesitated, then turned to the nurse behind the counter. "Anyone up there?" The nurse shook her head. "No one goes up there. Keys were taken years ago." Jamie slowly pushed the door open. Rocky bounded up the stairs without hesitation. The attic smelled of mothballs and time. Light leaked through, a small round window near the ceiling painting the space in a dull gray haze. Rocky stood still near an old cedar chest in the far corner. Jamie's boots crunched against loose nails and warped wood as she made her way over. Rocky let out one bark, just one. The lid of the chest wasn't fully closed. Jamie took a breath, then opened it. Inside were blankets, old clothes, and under them, a bundle of notebooks bound with twine. She pulled one out and opened to the first page. To whom it may concern, if I ever disappear, this is why. Later that day, Jamie sat with the notebooks spread across a table in the community room. Pages of cramped handwriting, some shaking, some angry. All of them belonged to Irene Holloway, a name Jamie vaguely recognized from a plaque on the memory garden outside. Irene had been a resident. She died in 2017. But these journals? These were never mentioned. They read like a diary, part confession, part cry for help. She'd written of being mistreated by a former staff member, of something she'd witnessed but was too afraid to report. One line stood out. No one would believe an old woman with bad memory. But I remember him. I remember what he did to that girl. Jamie brought the discovery to Director Harold the next morning. He paled. We had some issues back in the day, he admitted. There were reports, rumors, but no one ever came forward officially. The staff member she wrote about, he left in 2016. We never had proof. Jamie's jaw clenched. You do now? Harold nodded slowly. We need to alert the authorities. And the girl. Jamie blinked. She's still here? Not here. But she visits sometimes. Her grandmother still lives on the second floor. That week, Jamie met Clarissa Dunn, a young woman in her late 20s. She sat across from Jamie in one of the side rooms, holding the journal in trembling hands. My grandma always said Irene was her best friend, she whispered. I didn't know. I thought it was just my fault. Jamie stayed silent. I was 17. Clarissa continued. I volunteered here. I told one nurse something felt wrong. She told me I was imagining it. After that, I stopped coming. Her voice cracked. But Irene knew. She was the only one who asked if I was okay. Jamie nodded. She didn't forget. She just never found the right person to listen. Later, Jamie sat on a bench outside with Rocky by her feet. 2 secrets, she murmured. 2 cries for help hidden in this building. And somehow you found them both. Rocky shifted slightly, resting his chin on her boot. You think there are more? She asked, half joking. Rocky's ears flicked at the sound of wind brushing. The hedges nearby. Maybe news of the journal spread quickly through Ridge Valley, but it wasn't treated like scandal. It became part of a larger conversation, about dignity, about trust, about listening to those so often ignored. The attic was cleaned, organized. A new policy was introduced allowing residents to submit anonymous notes or confessions which would be read by both a counselor and a legal liaison. They called it the Holloway Initiative. Clarissa returned the following week, not as a visitor but as a volunteer again. She spent hours reading with the residents, helping them write letters, telling stories. Jamie found her one day sitting beside Eleanor's old bed, reading aloud, from a book about forgiveness. I didn't realize how much I missed this place, she said, how much I needed to come back. Jamie leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You're not the only one who needed it, she said. She looked down at Rocky. He's got a nose for healing. That night, as Jamie drove home, she thought about Eleanor, Irene, and Clarissa. About how silence echoes, and how easily it's mistaken for peace. And she thought about Rocky, who even in retirement wasn't done working, because the truth isn't always buried in files or courtrooms. Sometimes it's stitched into pillows, hidden in attics, written in shaking hands on fragile paper, and sometimes it takes a dog to find it. The Holloway Initiative changed Ridge Valley. Suddenly, Stories began to surface. Quiet ones, honest ones, some heartbreaking, some beautiful. A few were nothing more than notes of gratitude or unfinished letters to lost spouses. But others whispered of pain that had never been spoken aloud. And Rocky, ever vigilant, ever still, became the unspoken guardian of that truth. He was older now, a little slower, but that nose still worked better than any human instinct. That's how it started again, with a smell. It was a crisp Saturday morning in late October. Pumpkin decorations hung from the windows, and the scent of cinnamon floated from the kitchen. Jamie stood at the front desk, chatting with Nurse Carol about a new resident who kept slipping crossword puzzles under other people's doors. But Rocky's ears twitched. Then his head turned, and he walked, slow, deliberate, toward the south wing. Jamie followed. "Where's he going?" Carol asked. Jamie shook her head. "He always knows." The south wing led to the garden, a half-acre courtyard framed by oaks, azaleas, and a stone bench in the middle. Most residents used the east entrance, which opened from the cafeteria. But the south wing had a second door that was always locked. Always, except today it wasn't. Rocky stopped just short of it and sniffed around the base. Then he pawed, twice softly before sitting. Jamie tested the handle. It turned. She opened it and stepped outside. The air smelled like fallen leaves and faint mildew. This side of the garden hadn't been trimmed in a while. A vine had grown thick across one of the back fences, and the stone bench had moss growing along its edges. Rocky trotted forward, nose to the ground, then turned abruptly and stopped in front of the bench. He barked, once. Jamie looked down. There was a rusted metal tin tucked just beneath the bench's base, half buried in soil and leaves. She knelt and pulled it free. Inside was a stack of aged Polaroids. Each one featured a young man, early 20s, always with a different elderly resident. They were smiling, always smiling. Sometimes inside, sometimes out in the garden. In every shot, he wore the same pale blue scrub top. The name tag read, Derek. Jamie flipped through them slowly. Something felt off. Then she saw the notebook. It wasn't Irene's handwriting. This was messy, uneven, like someone trying to capture their thoughts quickly before they vanished. She read the first page. They always said he was sweet, but he made me feel small. He touched my hand too long. He whispered things I didn't understand. Jamie's stomach tightened. That afternoon she brought the tin to Director Harold. His reaction was immediate. "Derek Morse," he said, voice tight. "He was an orderly here. God, 12 years ago? Maybe more. No formal complaints, some suspicions, but like everything else back then, it was brushed off." Jamie held up the photos. "Who took these?" Some residents had disposable cameras for craft hour. Derek liked helping with scrapbook day, or he liked controlling the narrative. Harold sat back, exhaling. "Let me guess. Rocky found it?" Jamie nodded. "In the garden, under the south bench." Harold rubbed his face. "He's been gone for years. We couldn't even prove anything." Jamie opened the notebook to a marked page. "I remember his cologne. I remember the way he looked at me when I said no. I want someone to remember me after I'm gone." And under it, M.W. Harold looked up. "Margaret Winston. She died in 2016. Jamie didn't speak. They didn't need to. The following day, Jamie met with Margaret's son, Paul. He worked as a local pharmacist and had been visiting less frequently since his mother's death. When Jamie handed him the notebook, he held it with both hands, fingers trembling. "I always wondered," he said. "She got so quiet. Stopped talking. Said she didn't like the garden anymore. I thought it was just dementia." Jamie looked him in the eye. "She remembered." Paul's voice broke. "She was tough, my mom. Grew up during the war, raised me alone. I wish I had pushed harder, asked more. Jamie shook her head. You didn't fail her. The system did, Paul asked. To speak during the next family night, he read portions of the notebook out loud, not to shame, not to accuse, but to honor the courage it took to write it. At the end, he said, I believe her, and I hope one day every family can say the same about their loved ones. He left a bike, framed photo of Margaret in the garden right by the bench. A new plaque was installed. In memory of M.W. May the unheard always find a voice. Rocky sat by that bench every time he visited after that. Sometimes he'd nap. Sometimes he'd just stare. Jamie didn't know if he was remembering something or waiting. Either way, she let him stay. In the weeks that followed, Jamie got approval to review old staff files. With Harold's help, they started a quiet internal investigation, reaching out to families, offering resources, asking the hard questions that should have been asked years earlier. Not every case had closure. Some were too old, some too faded. But some found light again, and Rocky, he just kept sniffing, searching, and sitting in silence when something didn't feel right. Ridge Valley started receiving letters from other facilities. Word had spread about the K9 dog that had uncovered not one, not two, but 3 long-buried truths. One administrator called him the 4-legged truth detector. But Jamie knew better. Rocky didn't find evidence. He found pain. Pain that was buried deep. Pain that was begging to be seen. And somehow he always knew where to look. That night, Jamie took Rocky home, gave him a warm bath, and laid a fresh blanket in front of the fireplace. She watched as he turned in a slow circle and curled up, finally resting. She crouched beside him and whispered, You're not just helping them, you know. You're helping me, too. Rocky opened one eye, thumped his tail once, then went back to sleep. The truth was, Jamie had never really known what she was meant to do after leaving the force. But with Rocky beside her, showing her how to listen with more than just ears, she finally felt like she had a purpose again. Jamie never set out to be a storyteller. She was a cop first, a handler second, a dog lover by nature. But what she'd become, what she was becoming, felt more like a bridge between past and present, silence and voice, trauma and healing. And at the center of it all was Rocky, the K9 who just wouldn't stop working, even in retirement. The story of Ridge Valley and the truth-finding dog started to spread. Local newspapers picked it up first. Then a regional radio station called asking to interview Jamie. Then a national podcast on animal heroes featured Rocky. Within weeks, Jamie's inbox was flooded with messages, some kind, some heartbreaking, some desperate. One message stood out as subject line, I think your dog was trying to tell me something too. The email came from a woman named Cynthia Malone, who worked at a different assisted living center in Columbus, 2 hours away. We met you and Rocky last fall when you visited Oak Pines during the community showcase. I never forgot him. Few days after your visit, he kept staring at one of our memory boxes on the 2nd floor. He whined, nudged it. We thought maybe there was food hidden in it or something, but now, I'm not sure. That box belonged to a resident who passed recently. Her name was Ruth Lynn. She was one of my favorites. Jamie read it twice. Then again, she remembered the visit. She and Rocky had done a quick weekend tour with several other K9 retirees, stopping at 5 different facilities. She barely remembered Oak Pines, but apparently, Rocky did. Jamie called Cynthia and drove out the next morning. Oak Pines was smaller than Ridge Valley, but had a similar feel. Warm wood floors, wide hallways, the scent of coffee and pine cleaner lingering faintly in the air. Cynthia greeted Jamie with a firm handshake and a nervous smile. I thought I was crazy, she said, but I kept thinking about your dog and that box. They walked up to the second floor, room 214. Inside was a simple memory shelf. Photos, a pair of knitting needles, a dried corsage, and a faded Bible, bound in cracked red leather. Rocky walked over to it without hesitation. He sniffed once, twice, then he sat and stared. Cynthia handed Jamie a plastic bag with gloves. "I haven't touched it since you replied." Jamie opened the Bible gently, flipping past the first few pages. Tucked near the back was a folded paper. She unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was shaky but purposeful. "To whoever finds this, please know I wasn't afraid to die. I was afraid no one would know the truth. In 1971, my daughter disappeared. They said she ran away. I know she didn't. I saw the man. I saw what he put in her drink. But I was too scared to speak. And then they buried it. Her too, I think, somewhere out there. Her name was Virginia Lynn. She was 16. Please find her." Jamie closed her eyes. It never stopped. These stories. These echoes. She pressed her hand against the Bible's cover and whispered, "We hear you now, Ruth." Back in Columbus, Jamie called in a few favors. Within a week, she tracked down the old case. Virginia Lynn, missing since July 1971. A cold case. No body, no charges, just a police report, a brief news article, and an old photo of a soft-eyed girl in a floral dress. The original detective had passed. The only name mentioned in the file besides Virginia's was a local music teacher, never charged. Jamie sent the info to the county's cold case unit, and she waited. Meanwhile, Rocky became restless. He didn't sleep as long, he paced more. He started whining at Jamie's door around 5 a.m., like he knew something was coming. He always did. Then, one evening, Jamie got the call. A construction crew working a few miles outside town had uncovered human remains in a wooded area. Shallow. Grave. No ID, but nearby was a rusted bracelet engraved with the initials VL. DNA would take time, but Jamie didn't need a test. She already knew, and so did Rocky. At Ruth Lynn's memorial service, delayed 5 years so she could finally rest next to her daughter, Jamie sat in the back pew, Rocky's head resting on her boots. Cynthia stood at the front and read Ruth's final words aloud. Half the room wept. The other half sat in reverent silence. Later, Jamie walked through the old cemetery, gravel crunching beneath her boots. She stopped at Virginia's headstone. Newly, carved a beloved daughter, forever missed, finally found. Rocky stood beside her, and for the first time in a while he barked. Not loud, not alarmed, just a single resolute bark, like punctuation on a sentence that had waited 50 years to end. Driving home, Jamie turned to Rocky in the passenger seat. "You keep pulling these stories out of the dark," she said. "One by one. I don't know how you do it." Rocky gave a slow, approving exhale, then rested his head on the console. That night, Jamie found herself standing at her kitchen counter, staring at her dad's old box of belongings. He'd passed away 6 years earlier. A veteran, a tough man, quiet, kind when he wasn't haunted. She hadn't gone through most of his things. It still felt too raw. But now, maybe it was time. She opened the box. Dog tags, a worn baseball glove, and a yellowing envelope marked, "Jamie, if you ever want to know." She stared at it, hands trembling. Then she looked down. Rocky sat beside her, eyes steady, like he'd been waiting for her to finally look. The envelope had been in the box for 6 years. Jamie held it like it was something fragile, sacred, and heavier than it should be. Her father's handwriting, sharp, deliberate, ran across the front. "Jamie, if you ever want to know." She set it down on the kitchen table. The lights were off except for one lamp over the sink. Outside, rain whispered against the window panes. Rocky lay curled on the rug, his eyes fixed on her, not moving, not blinking, just waiting. Jamie took a breath, Then she opened it. The letter was short, barely half a page. The kind of thing written late at night by someone who wasn't sure they'd ever have the courage to hand it over. Jamie, I wasn't always who I said I was. I told you I served 12 years in the Army. That was true. But what I didn't say is that something happened over there that I never could forget. I saw things, did things, and when I came home I shut down. I failed your mom, I failed you. But I always wanted to fix it. I just didn't know how. I know you're strong, smarter than me, more honest. If you're reading this, maybe it means you're ready to forgive me. Or at least understand I didn't want to leave you with questions. So here's the truth. There was a village, a mistake, a command I followed that I never should have. A boy who didn't make it, and I've carried him with me every day since. Love, Dad. Jamie didn't cry, not right away. Instead, she sat in silence. Her fingers touched the bottom edge of the paper again and again. She read it twice, then a third time, and finally she whispered, "You should have told me sooner." Rocky, sensing the shift, patted over. He laid his head on her lap and closed his eyes. The next morning, Jamie woke early. She made coffee, fed Rocky, then pulled out an old photo album from the hall closet. Inside were years of memories, beach trips, baseball games, blurry Christmas mornings. And tucked between 2 pages was a picture she hadn't seen in years. Her dad, sitting on the back porch holding a puppy. Rocky. He was only 10 weeks old in that photo. A scrawny little German shepherd with oversized ears and a stubborn stare. Her. Dad had trained him before she did. It hit her suddenly. Maybe Rocky hadn't just been her partner. Maybe he'd been her father's way of making amends. Of leaving her with someone who could protect her in ways he couldn't. Jamie leaned back and closed her eyes, tears falling for the first time. Later that week, she and Rocky drove back to Ridge Valley. The south garden had been cleaned up for fall. The bench was swept, flowers planted, the plaque for Margaret Winston polished and gleaming in the morning sun. Jamie sat with Rocky beside her. "I think I finally get it now," she said. Rocky didn't move, just listened. All those secrets, all those people who never got to say what they needed to say. You weren't just barking at pillows and digging through boxes. You were giving people a second chance. She paused. And maybe you gave me one too. As the months passed, Jamie found a new rhythm. She started working part-time with a therapy dog organization, taking Rocky to visit trauma centers, shelters, and schools. Every place they went, something shifted. Kids who hadn't spoken in days reached for him. Veterans with haunted eyes sat a little straighter when he walked in. Nurses asked if he could stay longer, and every now and then, Jamie would feel it. That weight in the room. That hidden truth. And without fail, Rocky would find it. He never failed. One spring morning, Jamie brought Rocky to a school assembly. It was a career day for third graders. Doctors, firefighters, park rangers. Jamie didn't plan to say much, just introduce Rocky. Let the kids pet him. Keep it simple. But one little girl raised her hand. "Why does your dog always look so serious?" The room chuckled. Jamie knelt beside Rocky, scratched his ear, and said, "Because he listens better than most people ever will." She looked at the children. And sometimes, when people are hurting too much to say the truth out loud, dogs like Rocky help bring it to the surface. They feel things we miss. They remind us to stop, to notice, to care. The little girl nodded, wide-eyed. Like a superhero. Jamie smiled. Yeah, exactly like that. Rocky passed peacefully a year later. He was lying on the porch in the late afternoon sun, Jamie beside him, a hand resting gently on his back. There was no drama. No storm. Just a breeze, a bird singing in the trees, and a long, contented sigh as he drifted off to sleep for the last time. Jamie buried him beneath the big oak tree behind her house. She placed 3 items in the ground with him. The letter from her father, a folded photo of Eleanor on her pillow, and a slip of paper with 3 words, "You did good." The following fall, Jamie launched a foundation, Rocky's Echo. It helped train retired canines as therapy dogs, placing them in nursing homes, trauma units, and schools. The goal was simple: healing through presence, listening without judgment, letting the quiet speak. And everywhere those dogs went, stories surfaced. Secrets found light, just like Rocky always knew they would. Thank you for following this journey of silence, healing, memory, and a dog who refused to ignore the truth. We'd love to hear from you. What would you have done if Rocky barked at something from your past? Would you listen? Would you look, or would you finally let yourself be heard? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals for more unforgettable stories of courage on 4 legs.